I've been a trucker for close to 15 years now, and this happened to me in 2017. I was driving an overnight haul through the Mojave Desert in California, headed for a destination in Arizona. I think I was delivering appliances, but I don't really remember. It was pitch black darkness in every direction. My truck's headlights were dim, and I had been putting off getting them fixed forever. Usually it wasn't a big deal, but since there were no other cars on the road, the poor visibility was much more obvious. I had to strain my eyes every few minutes to make out the road in the distance. It could have been a horror story all on its own. I debated pulling over for a couple of hours to wait for sunrise, but I didn't want to waste time. I needed the money badly, so I kept driving despite knowing it wasn't entirely safe. The road was mostly a straight line, so I figured it would be okay. It was about an hour before sunrise when I saw something approaching fast in the distance. Worried about hitting an animal, I slammed on the brakes. My truck screeched to a stop, and I realized what was in front of me. A car with its hazards on. The weird thing was that it was sitting dead center on the double yellow lines. Even stranger, the passenger door was wide open. My truck stopped maybe a foot before hitting it. Not to toot my own horn, but I'm a pretty fearless guy, and I know my way around a bar fight. So I wasn't scared. More than anything, I was curious. I thought maybe someone needed a jump. So I reversed the semi, pulled over, and got out. The night was warm and eerily still. No wind, no sound, except for the faint clicking of the car's hazard lights. As I got closer, I saw it was a new-looking red Ford Fusion. I approached cautiously. The passenger door was wide open. I walked around to check inside. The car was completely empty. I checked the back seat and every other possible hiding spot. No one. My unease began creeping in. I cast glances over my shoulder, feeling like someone might charge at me from the darkness. My truck's dim headlights barely illuminated the surroundings, making everything feel even more surreal. Someone was out there, somewhere. Despite my gut telling me to get the hell out of there, I kept investigating. The key was still in the ignition, but the engine was off. I moved to check the trunk. Locked. I grabbed the key from the ignition and unlocked it, but it still wouldn't budge. It was jammed from the inside. I opened the back door and tried accessing the trunk through the back seat. To my surprise, it worked. Inside, I found 3 squished garbage bags and a rope tying the trunk closed. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I glanced around one more time before reaching for them. Then a gunshot rang through the night. It was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I slammed my head on the car's roof in shock. Without thinking, I threw the keys on the front seat and bolted. As I scrambled into my semi, a grungy voice yelled in the distance. "Hey! Hey!" His voice got closer, fast. I turned the engine over, cursing as it stalled. That's when I saw him. A short, husky man with red hair, wearing overalls and shin-high boots. In his left hand, he held a small shovel. In his right, an old hunting rifle. We locked eyes for a few seconds as my truck lurched forward. He didn't look crazed, just worried. Then, as I drove past him, he dropped the shovel and started waving his arms. "Wait! Wait! No chance in hell." I floored it, pushing my semi faster than I should have. I drove for 5 minutes, my mind racing. Then, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. Fast. Terror gripped me. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, doing my best to explain. Meanwhile, the car was tailgating me, honking like crazy. I had no idea what he wanted, but I wasn't stopping. I prayed he wouldn't try to ram me. 15 minutes of this chase later, he cut in front of me and slammed his brakes. I nearly crashed, but just then, I saw flashing police lights ahead. The Ford veered off, disappearing into the desert. I pulled over, shaking. The officer arrived, and I frantically recounted everything. But instead of chasing the guy down, he just took a report. I begged him to go after the car. He might still be close. But the officer waved it off, saying backup was coming, and they'd do a thorough search. I never got a call back. No follow-ups. Nothing. None of my trucker buddies have a story as crazy as this. I've told it more times than I can count. I know what you're thinking, that guy was burying bodies. But then, why the small shovel? Why chase me down? The bags in the trunk were too small for bodies, but some of my friends think he might have done some dismembering. For my own sanity, I like to believe he was just burying a diseased dog or some dangerous snakes. But I don't really know. Either way, I've never felt totally comfortable driving through deserts at night ever since. My name is Kevin, and I've been a trucker for various companies for over 15 years now. At this point, everything has become routine. Pick up the cargo, verify it, and deliver it on time. Since we're not paid by the hour, efficiency is the key in this job. And let me tell you, after all these years on the road, I've learned to outwork the younger drivers who think they can keep up. But there's a downside to pushing yourself too hard. You end up functioning on barely any sleep, and that's when things can go horribly wrong. 4 years ago, I was working for a warehouse in North Dakota. If you don't know, North Dakota is one of the flattest states in the country, which makes trucking a bit easier. But it also means that sleep deprivation can be the difference between keeping your job and getting fired. That particular week was hectic. More shipments meant more work, and I wanted to get everything done in one go. My route led me into Montana, and I planned to drive straight through the night without stopping. I hit the road a few hours after lunch, expecting to reach my destination early in the morning. I pushed my semi as much as I could, maybe a few miles over the speed limit. As midnight passed, I was rubbing my eyes, struggling to keep them open. I only had an hour left to drive, so I told myself I could make it. My buddy Tristan, another trucker, had introduced me to smelling salts when I first started. If you don't know, they're little bottles of ammonia-based crystals. One sniff and you're jolted awake, but they burn like hell. Tristan had warned me not to overuse them, but at that moment I needed a boost. I took a deep whiff, my head snapped back, and my senses went into overdrive. For a while it worked, but about half an hour later, exhaustion started creeping in again. I drifted off for a split second, only to be jolted awake by the rumble strips on the shoulder. This was getting dangerous. I had to pull over, but there was nowhere, just endless stretches of dark forest on either side of the road. I slowed down, desperately searching for a safe spot. That's when my headlights illuminated something unusual in the road ahead. Purple dress, just lying there in the middle of the road. My first thought? I was hallucinating. Sleep deprivation can do that to you. I blinked several times, rubbed my eyes, but the dress was still there. As I drove past it, an uneasy feeling crept over me. 100 yards further, I spotted a pair of shoes. My gut clenched. What the hell was going on? I drove past the shoes, gripping the small cross my dad had given me. He was a religious man, always saying it would protect me. I whispered a quick prayer, hoping for a sign that I was just imagining things. But then I saw more clothes scattered along the road. This time, they were children's clothes. That was it. I hit the brakes. Panic set in. Something was very wrong. I sat there for a moment, staring out at the dark road ahead, waiting for something, anything to happen. But there was just silence. My instincts screamed at me to drive away, but something about those tiny clothes made me step out of my truck. The moment the cold air hit me, I knew I had made a mistake. I approached the pile cautiously. There were both boys' and girls' clothes mixed in. I scanned the woods, straining to see beyond the tree line. Nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Then I heard it, a crunch. From the left, I whipped around, eyes darting into the darkness. Nothing. I stood frozen, listening. Another crunch, this time from the right. Someone was out there. Survival instincts kicked in. I sprinted back to my truck and jumped inside. Just as I grabbed the door to slam it shut, a child's scream pierced the silence. Every hair on my body stood on end. My heart pounded in my chest. I was at a crossroads. Either I go investigate or I get the hell out of there. Then, another scream, identical to the first. Something felt off. Too perfect. Too rehearsed. I didn't think. I turned on my truck, pointed my headlights toward the woods, and floored it. The beams cut through the darkness, revealing a group of 3, maybe 4, people. One of them held a massive speaker. They froze like deer caught in headlights before diving behind trees. I had just enough time to realize what was happening. They were trying to lure me into the woods with fake child screams. I sat there, gripping the wheel, mind racing. Who were they? What was their plan? Before I could reach for my phone to call the police, thump, something hit the side of my truck. Hard, from the opposite side of the road. I was done. I slammed the gas and peeled out of there. As I sped past, I caught sight of another figure on the roadside. He shouted something I couldn't understand before launching an object at my truck. The passenger side window cracked from the impact. I didn't stop. I drove the remaining hour in complete silence, my mind reeling. The next morning, after delivering the cargo, I crashed for 10 straight hours. When I woke up, I immediately called the police and reported everything. They assured me they'd investigate, but I never heard back. To this day, I have no idea what those people wanted. Were they trying to rob me? Kidnap me? Worse? I don't know. But I do know one thing. I should have never gotten out of my truck.